Hello.
Hi. How you doing?
Oh, I'm good. How are you doing?
Good. Getting situated.
Yeah.
Oh, there's Terry.
Hello.
Hi, Terry.
How's it going, Natasha?
Good. Good. All is well. Do you guys want to try sharing your screen?
Sure. Just closing down all the things that people don't need to see on my desktop.
Yeah.
It says that it's participants disabled for screen sharing.
Try again. We switched it.
Hi everyone.
Hi, Corey.
You changed my.
I always do this kind of embarrassing thing on my desktop where I will take everything and just put it into a folder called folder when I know I'm going to share my screen. Yeah, not great.
I mean, I don't know anything embarrassing, but probably everybody doesn't need to know my passport's about to expire.
Yeah.
Kristen, do you want to try
Good.
sharing the Mural board?
Sure, yeah.
Oh, sorry, I'll stop sharing. Here you go.
Okay. There's a, you guys see it?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Great.
In too. So
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying the polls, I added the polls too. So do you want me to run the polls? Natasha, do you want to run the polls? Does not matter to me.
How do you feel about running the polls, Corey?
I don't mind.
Yeah, cool. Great. And then I'll try sharing my screen. Let's see. Oop.
Great.
And there she is.
Yeah.
Great.
And
Great.
we're
Okay.
recording now. I'll just cut out all of this opening stuff in the final
Yeah.
and then send it out. So don't worry about what's going on right now.
Yeah.
Okay. Kristen, are you going to drop the Mural board into the chat so that people can get to it? Okay.
Yeah, I can do that. Get the link. I'll probably wind up posting it, near the beginning, and then I'll repost it at some point midway in case people join late because they won't be able to view in their chat then.
Cool. Okay. Thanks everybody for coming a little bit early. It's just good to, I always feel more secure. I'm like, okay, like everybody's on, we're good.
Yes.
We all have our drink nearby.
Yeah, it gives you a minute to just like breathe and get into the zone of
Yeah.
The Zoom zone.
the Zoom zone.
Yeah, the Zoom
Exactly.
zone.
Exactly.
Has everybody had a good morning so far? Oh, go ahead, Corey. Sorry.
I was just going to say that once we start, I'm going to go off camera, but I will be here and doing the polls. Whenever you want to do the poll, just, I'm sure I'll know from what you all say, but if you need anything else, I will be around. But yeah, that'll be my main role for today.
Cool. Yeah, I guess we have like 7 minutes, so we can just chill. If you need anything else, let me know.
Okay.
And I see people trickling in. Corey, do you have, can you see like the waiting room and such? Do we both have management abilities? Okay, cool.
Yep.
Did you just make me like a co-manager, like an alternative host?
Yeah, you're an alternative host, and then
Okay.
Terry, you're both co-hosts. So
Cool.
that should be good. Our final registration number ended up being 531. Like I said, we won't have 531 people on here, but if you wanted a final number, that's
I sure didn't.
so lots of excitement and enthusiasm for this topic, which is great.
Well, that's a lot of people.
Yeah. And like I said, a lot of people will watch the recording too. So we always get emails like, are you going to record this, or where's the recording? So a bunch of those people will probably go on our website, and I'll post the recording and your presentation on our website too, either later this afternoon or tomorrow. So it should be right up for those people who weren't able to join us.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Cool. I'll let people in like a minute or two before we start, and then we'll start like on the hour maybe, or maybe a little bit behind.
Kristen, I have a call from Bill Strominger, but I've never had a call with him that was less than like 10 minutes long. So I'm going to call him back after rather than before. I'm sure he's just calling to check in on stuff.
Yeah, it seems like that timing could be better.
Yeah. I always know it's him even from the voicemails, because, most people, the length of a voicemail is 10 or 20 seconds. Bill's are never shorter than a minute, which is surprisingly long in a voicemail.
That's how hunters are too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm no one to talk. I've left some long voicemails in my day.
Usually if I don't get through to someone, I'll just email them. But I'm a millennial.
Actually, from the barrier-free work, I never kind of knew how people who had vision impairments kind of did email. I mean, they have a program that turns your text, I guess I should have known this, into voice. And so, kind of some of the people we've been interacting with are really used to listening to. I can't imagine, some of my emails are pretty long. Like, stop talking.
Yeah, they're like written to be skimmed, not yours, but emails in general sometimes.
Oh no, mine. That's nice of you to say, but come on. Katie taught me an acronym, TLDR. She wasn't referring to me, I don't think. I think about it. I don't send people that note, but I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that.
I usually have to go and remove all my parentheticals out of my emails because I'm a happy parentheses user.
Yeah, I'm big on the extended dash, like, no, just stop the sentence and you're done.
Very Emily Dickinson of you.
Yeah, good point. I don't know if you can get into Page Up people, but we have 4 applicants for the senior urban designer.
Oh, great. 3
are international, and 4th is a really lovely urban designer, landscape architect who's also married to Rilu and is an adjunct faculty member on the main campus.
Oh.
I'm pretty interested in her.
No.
They all look interesting, but particularly her. If I could make her materialize this afternoon, I would do so. Oh, look at that. It's almost 2.
Oh yeah. Are you guys hiring to fill Killian's spot?
We
Yeah.
are, yeah. Among other things, I mean, we're coming out of a long hiring freeze, so we're also hiring an office manager, which I'm thrilled about.
Great. Yeah. Oh my gosh, the hiring process. I don't know. It's one of those things where it's like before you are in the workforce, it's like, oh yeah, like don't you just like grab somebody? Like, you know, and it's
Yeah.
like it's such a process.
Oh, yes. You know, and in a public university, there's just layers upon layers. So it's, yeah, it's going to take a while, but yes, we are hiring.
Cool. Great. Hey, so we have 62 people in the waiting room. 66. Oh gosh, it's climbing. Yeah. Okay, maybe I'll share the starting screen, and so people feel like, oh, I'm in the right spot. Okay. Okay, and I'll let people in.
Masa ella.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. If you would kindly just make sure you're on mute as you're coming in, that would be really helpful. And we'll get started in a minute. Thank you. Great. We have a good number of people trickling in. Thank you so much for joining. In the meantime, I'd love to see where folks are zooming in from. If you don't mind dropping in the chat where you're located. Kentucky, Kansas, great. Oxford, Ohio. Youngstown, Ohio, we have a couple Ohio folks. Madison, Las Vegas, wow, we're all over the place. County, some more Ohio action, Michigan. Oh, and we have Ontario, Canada, which is great, international. Thanks, folks. This is nice. This is really helpful, just to have a sense of where you all are. Okay. We have a few more people trickling in, but I think I'm going to go ahead and get started on the orientation and just welcome. Thank you all for joining today. I'm Natasha Riveron. I'm the Healthy Parks and Places Manager at Safe Routes Partnership. And I'd like to welcome you today to today's webinar, Community Engagement Lessons from the Pandemic. What should we keep in our toolbox? I am zooming in from Seattle, Washington. I've just newly moved here. I am going to give a quick orientation to the Zoom platform. I know that many of us have spent so much time on Zoom, but just to make sure, I will introduce Safe Routes Partnership, what we do, run over a quick agenda, and then introduce our speakers. For audio, you can press the microphone icon on the left to mute and unmute yourself. The audience will be muted during the presentation, but we really encourage you to verbally share later during the discussion if you're interested in doing so. The video is next to that, and you can join today through either audio, video, or both. And honestly, the speakers would love to see your faces, nods, smiles, grimaces maybe. They all help us know how you're reacting to the content, but it's not required. It is it isn't, we all like seeing your faces though. And then in the chat, feel free to submit questions and comments in the chat box bubble to your right of the screen. We'll be monitoring that throughout the webinar, so don't hesitate to participate there, especially if you're someone who likes to be able to write something instead of saying it verbally. We'll still take that feedback. All right, so Safe Road Partnership works to advance safe walking, rolling to and from schools and in everyday life, improving health and well-being of people of all races, income levels, and abilities, and building healthy, thriving communities for everyone. Our organization began that work with schools in mind and quickly realized that what's good for getting kids to school is also good for getting everyone in the community, regardless of age, to everyday destinations like grocery stores, parks, schools. Today's agenda is going to be pretty simple. It's just the welcome and introductions, which we're in, the speaker presentation, and then we'll have a Q&A and discussion that's a little longer at the end. And now I'm going to introduce our speakers today. First, we have Terry Schwartz, she is coming in from Cleveland, Ohio, and she is the director of Kent State University's Cleveland Urban Design Collaborative. Her work at the CUDC includes neighborhood and campus planning, commercial and residential design guidelines, and ecological strategies for vacant land reuse. She teaches in the graduate design curriculum for the KSU College of Architecture and Environmental Design. And then her colleague, Kristen Zieber, is a project manager, urban designer, and adjunct faculty at the CUDC as well. She has been with the CUDC since 2013 and contributes to the organization's neighborhood planning, research, mapping, and student advising. She also teaches Kent State's annual Midwest Urban Design Charrette. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to our guests today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Natasha. We're really excited to be here. We're thrilled with the size of this group. Kristen and I are very enthusiastic around these issues of community participation and community engagement, and we're so happy that kind of so many of you share our enthusiasm. Before we get started, Kristen is going to give a brief tutorial on how to use a Mural Board. Many of you probably have already used this technology, but what we would encourage you to do throughout this process is to make comments in the chat, and also feel free to pop over to the Mural Board and add your comments there. That's where we'll have our discussion following the presentation. So Kristen, can you show us Mural?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here today. Like Terry said, some of you might be familiar with this program. It might be a little less familiar to some of you than Zoom. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a sense for what this program or what this platform is. You can sign up for a free account in order to make your own boards, but if somebody has an account already, can make a board that anyone can then share. So that's what I'm doing with you all today. Any of you can edit it, any of you can add to it. I've set this up so that it's sort of a brainstorming and collaborating tool here. We've set this up here so that you guys can share with us. Again, as Terry mentioned, happy to have your discussion at the end, discussion in the chat, but if you would like to actually jot your notes down throughout, feel free to use this. So share your experiences on the left. Really a reflection of what has worked for you all over this past year. What have you found that you will continue using from here? And I dropped this one in because I think, all of us very rapidly had to get used to this particular platform. On the right, what engagement tools have you tried that have been less successful? So these are sort of the major topics that we'll be discussing today. I dropped a couple of Post-it notes here for you all to start populating. You can grab them and drag them over here. You can write your own. You can pick any color that you want. Over here is the sticky notes. And you can just drop those on the board and go ahead and write in something that you found that works really well for you. We also have any additional thoughts or comments that you want to contribute or kind of just let us know about down here. Same thing, feel free to drop a sticky note down here. The really nice thing about this is that in the same way as a real life public meeting, when you get to kind of peer over other people's shoulders, you get to start seeing what other people are saying, and then you can add comments to it, or that can kind of jog your own thoughts. On the left, we've actually gone ahead and dropped in the resources that Terry will be going over with you today in terms of our case studies. So this is basically your resource board. The ones on the left are actual full PDFs. You can click on these and you can go ahead and download them as a PDF here. So these are, again, Terry will be going over these in a little bit more detail, and then some links to some of the projects and case studies we'll be discussing. We would love to hear from you all about your projects that you've known, that you have been aware of this past year, best practices, other resources. So if this is something, even if it's just using the text bar and writing something in down here, go for it, using a sticky note, or you can actually drop in a JPEG or other things like that, adding a link in here. So it's pretty intuitive platform. I would say for today, maybe just focus on the sticky notes, the text bars, and collaborating with each other through here. So yeah, and if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask me through the chat. I think I'll be trying to take notes from your chat into the Mural board. So yeah, we'd love for this to be just like a live document of today's discussion.
Thanks, Kristen. I'm so entertained to see all of your cursors moving around in the Mural board. You know, it's very exciting to see this collaboration opportunity. You know, kind of to reiterate what Kristen said, we have been thinking about these issues for a long time, but we do not make a claim to understand all of the innovative practices that have emerged during the pandemic. That's why this kind of session is so important to us. We are putting together a report summarizing the things that we've discovered, and that will be available in about 2 weeks through Safe Routes Partnership. But we, you know, kind of want to make sure that we are using this opportunity where we're all together to learn from you. So if I'm talking about a case study and you think, well, I know of a project like that, or I know something that's completely different, please do share it, because we would love to incorporate your ideas into this final collection of community engagement practices. So let me go to the presentation mode. Okay, so one of the tools that you'll find in the Mural board is this guide, Guidelines for Low Contact Community Engagement. Our center produced this about 1.5 years ago now. I should tell you just a little bit about us. We're the Outreach Division for the College of Architecture at Kent State. We're a community design center, and community engagement is central to the work that we do. And suddenly, probably like many of you, we found ourselves last March in a moment where we couldn't get together with the people who we typically collaborate with, our community development corporation partners, residents, business owners, stakeholders, park users. We suddenly had to you know, kind of adapt to this new world. So one of the first things we did was exploration into the kind of tools that we could use to continue having community conversations so that projects could move forward, even though, you know, kind of all of our traditional methods had been upended by the pandemic. So the one thing about this guide is that, you know, we kind of framed it around the CDC recommendations for reopening. Last March, we didn't realize that reopening would be so far in the distance, but, you know, kind of when we really couldn't safely be together, here are a range of practices and tools you can use. As things begin to reopen, here are some other things that you can use. So it's a lot of digital tools. We, you know, kind of did a comparison of the things that were available. Many new things have emerged since then. But we also tried to focus on some, you know, kind of in-person things that could happen outdoors, or some low-touch opportunities for people to collaborate with each other. So if you're interested in this, I will say that, you know, kind of last March seems like 1,000,000 years ago, but some of the, you know, kind of some of the tools and recommendations may still be useful to you now. I also point out that we're not the only ones who did this. Maybe some of you were involved in developing similar kinds of guides. These two we particularly like, the community engagement during COVID that was developed by the Urban Institute, and also the strategies and tools that came from the Landscape Architecture Foundation. We thought these two might be particularly useful to you all, given that you're part of the Safe Routes Consortium. These two documents are also available on the Mural board. The important thing I think about all of these three is that from the beginning, they were envisioned as tools to use during the pandemic and beyond. So today we're going to try to focus on the beyond, because hopefully we are moving into a future with COVID-19 in the rearview mirror. So I just want to give a quick shout out to our former associate director, Killian Riano. I think I saw you kind of pop in through the waiting room. So Killian was with us for about 2 years, and part of his work was to do the research behind these best practices that we're going to be sharing with you today. So Killian, if you or if anybody in the audience is involved in any of these projects, do feel free to chime in and add details and context to any of these. I'm not going to go through all of these because I wouldn't want to make you late for dinner, but we'll hit on some of the highlights, cover a range of tools and best practices. The links again are all in the Mural Board, and these and more will be baked into that final report that we're putting together. So let's start. Let's start with Moakley Park in Boston, Massachusetts. This is a project, a park that's process designed by Stoss Landscape Urbanism. The park itself is, kind of remarkable in the sense that it's one space, but it serves a lot of different people and a lot of different uses. And so Stoss had to think pretty carefully about an engagement process that would encompass many points of view. So initially, before the pandemic, the idea was to organize engagement around open houses, on-site events, a lot of high contact on-site communication and collaboration. One of the kind of things that they did that we thought was really thoughtful and interesting was this little station where people could pour water on a variety of surfaces to get a kind of visceral understanding about green infrastructure and the way that stormwater percolates into the ground. So when COVID hit, suddenly this whole new range of tools got put into place by Stoss to continue the conversation with community members. One thing that they learned, and maybe you all have had similar experiences, is that when you throw a lot of digital tools at a community, it's very important that they be well integrated. You know, if you are using one survey platform and another for polling and another for online meetings, you have to make sure that they work pretty well and seamlessly together, because otherwise you'll lose people along the way. So some of the tools that Stoss used included Slido, Google Forms, Google Jamboards, which is kind of like Miro. We found in a lot of the people that groups we talked to, using YouTube videos to share meetings and activities with the larger community was helpful. I wonder if any of you have discovered, kind of innovative uses for TikTok as a way of engaging maybe with some younger audiences. This project also had a really lovely analog component, which was this coloring book intended to engage younger audiences. For all of the case studies, we're going to highlight the kind of challenges and struggles that the process had, but also the successes. So in this particular case, one of the struggles was that even though the design team used a lot of pretty user-friendly digital engagement tools, people still wanted to get together. And so one of the ways that they managed to bring people together was around a distanced outdoor cleanup event, meaning that people could come together on site, talk about the future of their park, and provide a social good together. Kind of this shared opportunity to do something of real value to help and protect their park. I just realized I forgot to do the first polling question. So let's take one step and go back. And Corey, if we could have the first polling question, we just are curious about all of you. So if you could tell us a little bit about what you do, whether you're part of a nonprofit, government agency, private company, self-employed, community, volunteer, or other. If you choose other or any of these, feel free to elaborate in the chat. Great. So we've got a lot of people from government agencies and nonprofits, as well as some private sector companies participating. Some people are self-employed and some others. So thank you for weighing in. This is really helpful to us to kind of know who's in the Zoom room. There we go. Okay, so can we go to the second polling question as well? This one is more tied to, kind of what we were just talking about in Moakley Park. The second question is, do you have experiences or ideas about community engagement that has, kind of a social good, a social benefit? Oh, sorry, you don't have the polling question yet.
Terry, the polling question that I have is about the digital divide. Is that the one that you want?
Oh, I was hoping for the one after that.
Okay, give me 1 second.
Sorry, Corey. There we go. Okay, so in Moakley Park, this kind of idea about cleanup events offered this opportunity for community engagement and bringing people together. So what we're wondering from you is, have you, kind of offered similar kinds of events where people can participate in a social good and use that as engagement? So it looks like some of you have and some of you haven't, and some of you are not sure. For any of you who have, kind of used a service activity for community engagement, if you would share that with us, either in the chat or on the Mural board, we would appreciate that. We would like to capture those. So I think we can end the polling on this one. Thank you. Okay, so that's Moakley Park. Let's keep moving because we've got quite a few of these, not a huge number, but I want to make sure we highlight the big ideas that we've discovered. So the next one is Garfield Park, Garfield Neighborhood Community Plan in Toledo, Ohio. The Toledo Design Collective is our sister center. There are community design centers all over the country. If you haven't met the design center in your neck of the woods, you might want to find them. We, we're a powerful support for community engagement and community design. So in Ohio, there are actually 4 community design centers, and I'm going to show you 2 quick case studies from 2 of them. So in Toledo, the Toledo Design Collective was doing a neighborhood plan for Garfield, kind of pretty typical community plan in that there are a range of uses, businesses, residential areas, a river runs through it, but what they found was that the community engagement process that they had proposed, oh, sorry, it's not letting me advance my slides. There it goes. Before the pandemic, they had a community engagement strategy that was all set to go, but then COVID hit, and so they had to shift gears. Among the tools that they used were physical surveys, paper surveys, and physical drop boxes, so people could complete the survey and return it in one of the drop boxes. And they had a remarkably good response of more than 200 surveys completed. They created a project-specific website, and they used a particular tool that actually incorporated, as we were talking about a little bit before, incorporated a range of tools all in a single platform to make the engagement process seamless. There were also a range of YouTube videos that explain aspects of the plan and a very robust, multifaceted social media strategy. The challenges that the Toledo Design Collective faced in this work was, kind of something that I think a lot of us are experiencing, which is the digital divide. Here in Cleveland, about 30% of our residents have no access to the internet in their homes, which is a pretty remarkable number. We do have nonprofits working to address the digital divide, but it's very real and it exists. Even among people who have access to the internet and digital tools, what the Toledo Design Collective discovered was a degree of digital engagement burnout, which maybe some of you have experienced in your own work as well. Things that really seem to work are those short videos on YouTube that helped explain the project, their approaches for social media and website outreach. And also those physical drop boxes did a pretty good job of, kind of collecting data from people in a physical paper format. Corey, would it be possible now to go to that previous polling question about the digital divide? We're just wondering from all of you if this challenge that we've encountered in a lot of our work is also an issue where you are. So yes, for a lot of people in my community, the digital divide is real. Yes, for some people in my community, or no, in my community, most people have digital access. Or there's always other. So if you're experiencing something else, do feel free to drop it into the chat. Okay. Yeah, I guess what I'm seeing here on the screen is that, not surprising that for some people, in places where we work, some of the people who have the least access to digital tools on the internet tend to be some of our older residents. Also in communities that have lower, kind of income residents, sometimes we see less access. Made more challenging during the pandemic because a lot of the places where people could access the internet, like libraries and school, were closed. Okay, so that's really helpful. Thank you. All right, let's go on to a little bit similar project from another design center in Ohio. This is the Rapid 5 project. It's a little different in that it's not a neighborhood plan, it's a corridor plan for five waterways in Franklin County, where the city of Columbus is located. It's a pretty interesting planning process in the sense that it's looking at these 5 riparian corridors and seeing more than a green space master plan, although that's an important part of it, is like how can the waterways and the geology and geography of the region connect people to resources, create economic development opportunities, and also, kind of enhance and reinforce the natural, kind of geography and natural environment of the community. So the meetings were for this plan were actually arranged ahead of the pandemic, and much like the Toledo Design Collective, the Columbus Neighborhood Design Center also had to pretty rapidly shift gears. Similar to Toledo, they used surveys as a way of addressing the digital divide, which were available at local institutions and rec centers. They also used physical drop boxes and had posters in high traffic areas of the trails, so the trail users were, kind of able to connect with the process. And also using a project-specific website. Again, this idea of integrating the various tools in a way that people can use them. And also a tool that I hadn't seen before this, which Peach Jar is a tool intended to connect students, K through 12 students and their parents, with community organizations and community activities. So the reason that, kind of this case study is a little bit interesting is that the paper surveys and physical drop boxes that worked so well in Toledo didn't work as well in Columbus. Perhaps because in Toledo, it was a smaller concentrated neighborhood where the Columbus Center was, the Columbus project was looking at a much bigger geography. But the paper surveys, there was a pretty low return rate. The successes of the project really kind of spring from the full service engagement platform that offered all the tools in one place and made it a little bit easier for people who are not used to using these kinds of tools to be able to jump in, learn the techniques, and participate. Okay, this project's a little different. The East 66th Street Transportation for Livable Communities Corridor Study is here in Cleveland. Transportation for Livable Communities is federal funds that are spent to improve the transportation network and system, and go kind of beyond pure transportation to look at, kind of community amenities, historic preservation, community engagement, on top of the connectivity and transportation planning work that's done as part of a TLCI. What makes this project interesting, that the slide is kind of showing, is that artists were engaged in this work from the beginning. A lot of times we have artists engaged in streetscape designs and corridor studies, but in this particular case, the artists were specifically focused on community engagement. The community had funding from the National Endowment for the Arts that was available. You know, if you've gone for an NEA funding, you know, it takes a while to get that funding in place. And so the intention of working with artists was there long before, you know, kind of the shutdowns and challenges of the pandemic. But I think what the community found was that working with artists during a time of great uncertainty and crisis actually made the community engagement process much more robust and interesting. And part of that has to do with the specific community and the specific artists. This neighborhood, if you know anything about Cleveland, Huff's been through a lot. Huff was the area of you know, unrest in the 1960s. The community has suffered you know, disinvestment and just challenges for decades, but Huff is on the upswing. I mean, there is a lot of new investment happening. League Park, which is a historic baseball stadium, minor league baseball stadium that was also home of the, you know, kind of the Negro American League. Cy Young threw out the first pitch at League Park. This community has a proud history, you know, and is looking forward to a really bright future. The Cleveland Foundation, one of the biggest, first biggest private foundations in the country, recently decided to relocate their headquarters from downtown Cleveland to the Huff neighborhood on East 66th Street. So this is a neighborhood of change and opportunity and a lot of excitement. So what the artists did here, Lexi Lattimore is a dancer. Daniel Gray Contar is a writer who runs a program for young people in writing. And so both Lexi and Daniel, you know, developed these strategies. With Lexi, it was about movement. What you know, can kind of see in the previous slide here was experiencing the corridor through movement. The other amazing thing about Lexi was that she was part of the Zoom meetings. And if you go to a Zoom meeting with Lexi, she leads these movement moments. And you may be thinking kind of what I was thinking is like, I don't dance on Zoom, but Lexi is kind of irresistible and it's surprisingly effective. If you've been sitting in front of a screen for hours, days, weeks, you know, to be encouraged by someone who is just naturally in motion to move while you think about the future of your community. With Daniel, he was able to create a youth council that grew out of the writing program, you know, kind of that he runs with young people. And that youth council had a lot of input into East 66th Street and continues today in an autonomous way, separate from this project, but continues to weigh in on issues of development and design and community engagement in this neighborhood. The third person in the power trio for this project was Keith Benford, community leader who is digitally savvy and literally went door to door connecting people to the internet and showing them how to use Zoom. All I'll say here is that if you don't have a Lexi, a Daniel, and a Keith in your community, you should find them. I mean, these three people are pretty remarkable, but you'll find resources, you know, kind of people in your communities that can bring their special skills. It's important to find them and to pay them so that they can make your community process better. This was true before the pandemic, but became especially true during it, and hopefully something that will continue in projects after that. So in terms of struggles, the digital divide is real. And it took a lot of training and effort to get people of all ages comfortable with the technology. But I went to quite a few meetings for this process, and it was a beautiful coalition of people from really all ages and, you know, kind of participating comfortably in this process and dancing when Lexi asked us to. What really worked was the arts-driven planning and also, you know, kind of particularly the youth council and the digital literacy work that was part of this process. Another project, this one in Asiantown in Cleveland. Asiantown Sweethearts came about because Asiantown in Cleveland has a lot of restaurants and shops that were closed during the pandemic. And so this neighborhood had a higher than average percentage of people who are out of work. And 4 of those people who lost their jobs during the pandemic, 4 moms, kind of got to know each other and began to bake together. Here, that's what they bake. Before the pandemic, this kind of didn't exist, but these four moms started to bake together and started a business. They communicated on WeChat, which is a social media platform that's popular in the Chinese American community, at least here in Cleveland. The community organizer for Asiantown was also on this platform, discovered what they were doing, and found a way to get funding. This was the time when the Cleveland Foundation and other organizations were putting forward COVID relief grants. And so the community organizer found the funds and in the end, was able to provide financial support. So this thing that began as a hobby of shared baking between the Asiantown moms became a business and also turned into care packages that brought delicious treats to people in a really dark and challenging time that kind of made things better. So the struggle was that, kind of creating this network and turning it into a sustainable business wasn't an easy thing. But, kind of the success is that it actually worked. And these kinds of models using the digital technology to create, kind of connections that weren't there before. And also, kind of using it to provide benefits and services to the neighborhood seems to have worked really well here in Asiantown. I'm sorry, Corey, I keep forgetting to do the polling questions. So thinking back to that case study previously in Midtown, can we bring up polling question 4, which has to do with whether or not you work with artists in your community? There it is. Have you worked with artists on community engagement strategies? Yes or no? It looks like many of you haven't. So maybe this is a tool that some of you would be interested in exploring. We are coming up on, NEA season. You have to plan ahead, but the Our Town grants through the National Endowment for the Arts are, kind of available now, the application process anyway, and then those would be funds for projects that you could do next year. For any of you who have worked with artists on engagement processes, I hope that you'll share with us either in the chat box or in Mural. Thank you. Okay. Next, we're coming down to a point where we can kind of open things up for a broader conversation, but some of these last case studies are really exciting. This one, La Perse Outdoor Eating and Gathering Space in Bogota, is particularly interesting to those of us in the architecture world. We're part of the College of Architecture at Kent State, and when people make playful temporary interventions, we get kind of excited about it. The experience in Bogota during the pandemic was particularly challenging. Bogota had been gravely affected by the pandemic. In fact, had one of the longest shutdowns. It's also a city where very few people are able to work from home. So when suddenly people, kind of found themselves out of work, couldn't engage, kind of in community conversations in the civic realm, this idea of creating a temporary space that was safe during COVID, kind of a place that was safe for civic life during the lockdown became very important. What's interesting though, and not surprising, I guess, is, kind of there wasn't a budget to be able to begin these kinds of space making exercises. This project was organized by an agency called Diseño Público with the architecture firm Collab 19. So the project didn't exist before the pandemic. It was needed because of the pandemic, the creation, kind of this civic space. The tools that were deployed here, the main one is creative design thinking and real resourcefulness in response to an urgent civic need, and also a civic-minded company. What happened here, the architecture team recognized that without a budget, it would be hard to make something, but they looked at what materials were available locally at low cost and that could be reused. At the time, you may remember throughout the country and throughout the world, there were shortages of building materials, particularly wood and plexiglass. So they created this structure out of scaffolding, and a local company actually provided the scaffolding free of charge which, you know, kind of given the timing during the pandemic when a lot of construction projects were shut down, you know, this was just a good fit, a really smart idea of using scaffolding material that, you know, kind of wasn't needed maybe for some other construction projects, and creating, you know, kind of the space where people could come together. This is just one of them. If you go to the website, you can see some of the other things they built, which include a little chapel. The important thing here, the success that came about this here, is that, you know, temporary architecture actually created a setting for engagement where there wasn't otherwise. You know, it helped residents connect with each other, and so the places where we bring people together for engagement are, you know, are really important, and became more so during the pandemic. Now, you may be saying to yourself, well, you know, I don't have Ivy League trained architects, because both the partners at CoLab, one is from Columbia, one studied, they're both Columbian architects, one who studied at Columbia University and the other at Harvard. So how in my community could I create a temporary gathering space? Well, here's a project that we work on, you know, a longstanding project at the CUDC called Making Our Own Space. It's a design build program for middle school and high school kids. So our kids are really smart and talented, and, you know, kind of, they're not going to build something at the scale of, you know, kind of the project in Bogota, but they've made these beautiful smaller scale interventions that, you know, kind of allowed people to kind of use the outdoor space. Some of these have been set up in areas with Wi-Fi around libraries and schools. So if people didn't have Wi-Fi in home, they'd have a comfortable place where they could access the internet out in public space. It's cold here in Cleveland in the winter, but for those fall and spring months and moving, you know, kind of forward in the summer, you know, they actually work. This project here on the right was designed by the students pre-pandemic, but turned out to be very, you know, kind of useful in a time of social distancing. The students called this a bollard hack. This is a rec center on the city's east side. And the bollards are around the perimeter of the park to keep people from driving on the green space after hours. And so the students just started building stuff around the bollards. This project was called the friend zone bench. So when you want to sit with somebody but not too close to them, the bollards kind of help people keep their space and keep their distance. This is another project that they built actually during the pandemic that created a place where people could sit together but also have a little bit of a screen between them. One of my favorite parts of this program, if you go to the website, and you can link to it on the Mural Board, is that there is a borrow a bench function. So community members, including the Cleveland Metro Parks, have borrowed pieces of furniture and put them in public spaces so that people can enjoy the outdoors. Okay, last one here. This one is a really important one. They all are, but you know, I say that about all of them, but I really like this one. Visaya Delibera and Europa is a project that was intended to get community engagement from a broader and more objective collection of community participants. And how it works, you know, kind of for a regional planning effort, how do you get people in a room or in a Zoom room to be able to weigh in on issues that are important at a regional level? If your experience is anything like ours, when you have a project and you have a community event or a community meeting, the people most likely to show up are those who are directly affected. So, you know, if you live near a park and you're excited to get this resource improved, you will go there and advocate, you know, kind of for the things that you would want to see. Or if you live near a park and you're concerned about the noise or a problem that, you know, so either people really in favor or really opposed who are directly affected are likely to be part of a community conversation. But when you're looking at questions that impact people on a regional scale, you need to have more people in the room than those who are just immediately affected. So the way that this project works is that 35 people were selected from 7,000 postal addresses from this region in Spain and invited to participate in a process that looked at how European funds for green development should be spent throughout the region to create job growth and also to kind of promote more sustainable and ecologically sound development outcomes. So it was a lottery process. People were selected, and this was happening before the pandemic. This model of maybe a more objective, we kind of have shorthand for this. We talk about it like jury duty, right? If you were on trial, it's not really your best friends and your worst enemies that you'd want on the jury. It's more fair if you bring in people who don't have a vested interest in the outcome, or maybe who do, but who aren't like directly impacted. So 35 people invited to participate in this conversation that's ongoing. The conversations, I believe, are wrapping up this month in this first round. It involves 66 weekends and 30 hours of work where people were brought together to consider the future of their region and make recommendations. It's very transparent. You can go to the website. If you're like me and haven't, kind of studied Spanish since high school, the Google Translate is actually really effective. Instead of making gibberish the way Google Translate sometimes does, you can click on this one and you can get the gist of what the project is about. So people were trained then in Zoom and Miro, and also were mailed packages of materials for review and discussion. So some of the challenges here were that, kind of it made for less fluid conversations, having people in the room looking at plans together, a little bit different than having people kind of remotely connecting across a computer screen. And also some council members in this community, some of the older members of the council struggled more with the tools, but there was training, what you're seeing here in the picture, bringing people together to learn how to use the digital tools so that they could effectively participate. The reason why this one feels particularly important in this moment in communities all across our country, these American rescue funds are appearing, and we have to make good decisions about how to use them, and we have to make those decisions really quickly. I don't know about, kind of the communities where you're from, but in Cleveland, there's going to be about $411 million that needs to be, it's going to arrive over a couple of years. And so this kind of participatory approach to decision making through, kind of this, this process could be really effective. Cleveland is, did I say 411? It's actually $511 million in funding for Cleveland, and about $1 billion in Cuyahoga County, which is our larger region. So exploring new engagement tools to think about, kind of more objective and in-depth engagement and input feels really timely in this moment.
Terry, we have a really good question here from Katya asking if these folks were paid for their time, if they have a stipend.
Yeah, I had the same question, and I don't know if Killian, if you're out there and you have the answer to that. I sent an email through their website to ask that question. There is on the website no indication of pay, but you would think if you wanted to get somebody for 6 weekends and 30 hours that there should be a stipend involved in that. I can definitely, kind of when I, kind of hear back from the organizers, I'd be happy to share it with Natasha, and hopefully we can get that response to you. Okay, so we talked a lot over these case studies about the various digital tools that people are using. There are a lot of them, and so we're just wondering if we could bring up the next poll question. The last poll question is, of these tools, what do you use? What do you use in your community? And then if you have comments in the chat function about, kind of things that you have found particularly effective or things that you don't like at all and hope to never use again. So there are a lot of them, forgive me. I got a little carried away when I sent Corey this Zoom question, but scroll down and click on the ones that you use. I think you can click on all of the ones you use, not just, kind of one or two.
There's a lot of people saying Mentimeter in the Mural Board. So it seems like that's a pretty popular one.
Yeah, and Zoom, of course, we all use Zoom, and Teams and Google Forms. Yep, others. So yeah, this is helpful. Nobody's picked co-urbanize. The Cleveland Public Library here in Cleveland has used co-urbanize because they are doing a facilities plan and implementation throughout the pandemic, and they found that one to be useful, but I haven't had much experience with it myself. Okay, well, that's helpful. Okay, winding down before we all kind of jump into this kind of chat together, I just wanted to summarize here some of the things we've learned from the case studies. First is hybridity. We didn't talk about this too much, and maybe we can have some time together on this topic in the discussion. How are we coming out of the pandemic going to kind of engage people digitally and in person? What we've found in our work is that digital tools have been extremely effective for getting people into the conversation who might not have been there before. We do a lot of work with communities that have physical disabilities, older populations, also families with young kids who might want to be making dinner just at the time that you want them to come to a public meeting. Kind of being able to engage through a screen gives people the flexibility and convenience to be part of it. But we recognize the digital divide also kind of removes some people from the conversation. So one of the key takeaways is that moving forward, might need to find good and effective ways of people being able to engage on equal footing, regardless of whether they're participating digitally or in person. Secondly, integration is very important. As I've mentioned a couple of times, if you're using multiple tools, make sure they work seamlessly together, because otherwise you'll lose people along the way. Access is important. The lesson of our friend Keith Benford over there in Huff is that more people can engage through digital platforms if you give them the tools, the equipment, and also the training so that they feel confident. It's very empowering for people to kind of develop these new skills. Under digital cultures, the idea that not every tool is going to work in every setting, and that it's important to understand your community, understand the people who are participating in your process. We've also found, and maybe we'll find it today when Kristen switches us back to the Mural Board, is that sometimes people really enjoy seeing notes popping up in the Mural Board or on other platforms, but sometimes they're hesitant to participate themselves. I know from experience that if you click the wrong thing in Moreau, everything moves, but Kristen's there. She's used to fixing things when I mess them up, and I'm sure that she can do the same for you. Lastly, this last takeaway is also, I think, critically important, which is that, this has been a tough time, and kindness goes a long way. Food, whether it's the Asiantown Sweethearts or other ways. I mean, normally in a community meeting, we feed people as a way of promoting conversation. So when we can't be together, how do we kind of create those opportunities, those moments of communication? And to the last question about the Sara de Libera project, compensation is important. If you're working with artists, pay your artists. If you're, kind of asking a lot of community members, they should be compensated for their skills and their time and their expertise. So those are our key takeaways. We would love to hear from you about either things that you've seen in this presentation that you agree with or disagree with, or things that you've discovered in your own communities that you want to share, and hopefully would be willing to let us incorporate into the final, kind of document that we're producing as a result of this work. So with that, I'm going to just stop sharing so Kristen can take us to the Mural Board and see if people have questions, other things that may come up in the chat, or things that we see. Oh, look at this, you guys, you're amazing.
Yeah, to Terry's point, it seems like some of you were unintentionally moving things around. This has happened to all of us in Mural. It's a little bit of a learning curve, but it seems like we've kind of figured it out at this point. And yeah, this kind of really mining from you all what's worked and what hasn't. And we'll be kind of, like we said, summarizing a lot of this for our final report in a couple of weeks. So again, the kind of case studies are over here on the left. Additional thoughts and comments. I think a lot of the points that you all are raising are the ones that yeah, I don't think that anyone's really kind of figured out the answers to these yet, but there's a lot of real great creative suggestions that you all have come up with. Really like the idea of like digital scavenger hunts for folks throughout your neighborhood, getting to know your neighborhood better, especially when when you couldn't really necessarily go anywhere else. A lot of suggestions for specific tools. So the things that we were hearing from you all about the tools that you were using, Prezi, Zoom, ArcGIS, Interactive Map, Social Pinpoint. These are all great tools, and we'll try to kind of make sure that these are all captured. Other things like drop-in events throughout town instead of traditional charrettes. I think that's a really great idea. Walking meetings, walk shops. We've heard a lot about those sorts of things where it's safe to gather in smaller groups. You can walk through with people. Really like this idea of chalk spray paint to demonstrate possible street changes. That's definitely something that you could do, whether or not there's a pandemic, be thinking about the ways that your findings on your walks can be documented in the actual space that you're looking at. I think that's a great idea. Gift cards to local businesses. I think this is a real win-win. Like Terry said about compensation and kindness. Maybe it's a thing where, you recruit people to be on your steering committee and then you send them, a gift card to get themselves lunch during your meeting. And that really benefits local businesses. It makes sure that, that your folks feel like they've been compensated for their time. Lots of interactive maps. Lots of people talking about Google. I think Google is, we've heard a lot that Google and Facebook Live are some of the platforms that most people seem to have access to. So if you all felt a little bit like there was a learning curve in Miro, there is, and some people might not be interested in surmounting that. So some of those really basic and accessible tools can still sometimes be the most useful ones. Partnering with school districts, partnering with other groups. I think these are all great suggestions. Things that have been less successful, and I'm just reading out what I'm seeing here, but please feel free to keep dropping in ideas and stickies. And I like when you start, communicating with each other and dropping a thumbs up or dropping a yes next to these things. That's really when it becomes fun. Online surveys seem to be a little bit less successful for some folks. Over communication with schools. There's a couple of questions down below about, the bombardment that we've all been getting about, it's great that we all have access. It's been really great that we can all tune in from all over the country, from all over the world to all of these different workshops, but there's so much now. How do you kind of cut through that? And how do you make sure we're not oversaturating and really tiring out our community members when we really value their input and their time? Physical mailing, we heard, can be difficult. It seems like that's the same from some of our case studies, that in some neighborhoods, maybe on a smaller scale, it can work really well, but scaling up can be really difficult. And then the digital divide. This is most of what I'm seeing on this board is really those questions about how to really get around the digital divide. And so I think some of these creative gatherings, smaller gatherings, things that can be installed in their neighborhood, things that can be, pop up in your neighborhood to kind of indicate some ideas. Those can really access the folks that don't have the internet. Additional thoughts and comments. This is what we were talking about, the idea about the amount of engagement or work we're asking of community members. Combining simultaneous outreach efforts. I think this is a really great question. And again, this comes back to that idea of, we have a lot of people that we're asking a lot of questions of regularly. And this is everyone in planning. We all kind of understand this, but how do we make sure that the digital bombardment doesn't really exacerbate that? Okay, so that's just what I'm reading off here. A couple last things, and then I'll kind of open it up and we don't have a whole lot of time left, but for anyone else who actually wants to start, turn on your mic and start sharing with us. I want to just let you all know, here's Terry and my contact info at the bottom and our website. The contact, I think some of you were having a hard time downloading these documents on the left. I did wind up getting the URLs into the headers here. So if you click on them, you should have access to those now and can go to the websites and download them. And like Terry said, we'll be sharing all of this and synthesizing all of the great feedback that you guys are giving us today and distributing it to all your participants.
Also, if you have questions, and I know we only have a few more minutes left, but drop them in the chat. And if we don't get to them today, we will definitely follow up along with the other resources. So feel free to keep dropping questions in or unmute.
I saw one question while Kristen was scrolling through the Mural Board about what the best way is to engage with artists and community engagement processes. There are a number of things that people do. Sometimes it's as simple as a request for proposals, but sometimes you can issue a request for proposals, and if you haven't built relationships with your local artist community, you may not get any responses, or you may get responses from people who, kind of don't really have the, kind of background to connect with communities you're trying to reach. So probably the smartest thing you can do early on is to get to know people, artists in your community, which isn't to say that you can't do an engagement process and bring in an artist from elsewhere. James Rojas, I think of as an example of someone who's done a lot of work in Latinx communities who we've been courting to come to Cleveland. It isn't to say that somebody from outside of your community can't be effective, but the place to start is usually starting from home. Look around, try to get to know people who are there and have conversations so that when you do have a project, you can in your head be like, oh, well, to do a land use process about moving through the urban community, we're going to need a dancer, and we just happen to know one. That would be Lexi Lattimore. So just kind of as a first step to be kind of tuned into what's already going on and who's already there. Also, a number of organizations, particularly the National Endowment for the Arts, has regular training programs around arts in the engagement process. And so that's a good way, if you have time for another Zoom webinar, you can learn a lot about, kind of ways of doing outreach. I'm just scrolling through to see if there's any of the other questions.
Yeah, there was another question about translation, and has anyone seen particular success in simultaneous translation during community meetings? And so if anybody has, feel free to.
I have.
Go ahead, Ivana.
Yeah, I've had quite a bit of experience with that and have had some successes and some failures with that. And I can say that what I've observed works well is if the person who is translating is almost co-presenting and co-teaching. So the lag is sometimes such that it's distracting, and they have to be, for it to really work well, they have to be very conversant in the material. So if it's, most of my situations were where we're teaching, and so some of the curriculum is kind of set, and live translation, it was just a bit unbearable for people. And there are some tech details that give yourself plenty of time to iron out tech details with translation, because there's even more than in just a straight regular workshop or meeting on Zoom. That's the best practice that I've found for that. Yeah.
Hello, this is Jose, if there's still time. Okay, so I'm from Palo Alto State Francis School Coordinator. And one of the things I've noticed is that for especially Spanish speaking communities, languages, or at least words for certain things like sidewalk, a bus, can be really different between different parts of Latin America. So there's a lack of, this universal conversation or tool, which I'm actually trying to develop myself, is to kind of bridge that confusion between different locations within Latin America that might not express the same way, either certain infrastructure tools in a way that not only through words, because there are sometimes some communities that will not share with you that they do not know how to read or write, but they know how to look at images and explain those images to you in a way that affects them in a way. So there's also that problem where we think, by getting a nod like, oh, I got to them, they understand what I'm saying. But I question that nod to be, as an experience with my own mother, I'm like, Mom, did you understand what she said? Oh, yeah. I'm like, are you sure? She'd be like, well, so there's an issue there where we assume that if we talk to a whole community and we're like, we think we got everything, we got a nod from everybody, it's perfect. But there's a misconception there that they probably did not, but you just assume they think it did. So there's a problem there that we're, that at least I want to address, is that we really need to improve on ensuring that we build that trust and we're able to get as much info from these communities as much as possible. That's all.
Thank you so much, Jose. And it seems like also connecting imagery, being really clear about what we're talking about, creating kind of comfortable spaces. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm so glad. There's just so much happening in the chat box, so much happening on the Mural Board. Thank you so much to everybody for participating. And this doesn't end here. This conversation can continue. I do realize we're about 2 minutes past the hour. Kristen, Terry, thank you so much. Is there anything in closing you want to say?
Only thank you. I mean, this has been really helpful and also invigorating for us to be able to spend time with you, and learn from your experiences. That last point about sort of language variation and comprehension is important. It's the kind of detail that we need to be thinking about if we want to effectively engage communities. So just, gratitude. Thanks so much.
Great. I will make sure to send out resources, a link to the Mural Board, and everything that we talked about today. And yeah, thank you so much. I hope you all have a great rest of your day and keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you all.